My name is Clara Whitman. I am 28 years old. If you have ever sat in a meeting room while the person who signs your paycheck calmly rewrites what actually happened and makes you the one who messed up, then you already know how small the room can feel. I lived that day in Alpharetta, and I am still carrying pieces of it. If any part of this sounds familiar, stay with me. I need to get it all out. It started on a Tuesday morning that should have been ordinary. I had spent the weekend polishing the quarterly client update for our healthcare technology division. The numbers were clean, the slides were tight, and for once I felt like I had something solid to show for the late nights I had put in since moving to this corporate commuter haven 2 years earlier. My town home in Alpharetta was finally feeling like mine, simple, quiet, close enough to the office park that I could sometimes walk when traffic was light. I even wore the navy blazer my mother had helped me pick out when I first got the job, the one she said made me look like someone who belonged at the table. My older sister, Brooke, had texted the night before. "You've got this, Clara. Mom would be proud. Just don't overthink it." My father had called while I was making coffee and said the same thing in his steady way. "Keep your head down. Do the work. Let the results speak." I believed them. I wanted to believe them. At 28, I was still building the kind of career that could eventually let me stop worrying about rent and student loans, and whether I would ever feel truly steady. The meeting was in the main conference room on the 4th floor, the one with the long glass table and the view of the tree-lined corporate campus. Evelyn Hart, my boss, sat at the head. She had been with the company 12 years and ran our client strategy team with a kind of polished authority that made people sit straighter when she walked in. Taylor Voss, the coworker I had once considered a friend, was already there with her laptop open, smiling the small, careful smile she used when higher-ups were present. I started the presentation the way I had rehearsed. 3 minutes in, Evelyn raised one hand. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Clara, before we go further, can you walk us through the discrepancy on slide 7? The revenue projection you used doesn't match the final client data we submitted last quarter." I froze. Slide 7 was the one she had personally revised at 11:47 p.m. the night before the deadline. I had the email chain. I had the time-stamped version history. But in that room with 8 people watching, none of that mattered yet. "I used the numbers you sent me at the end of the day," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "The updated file is in the shared drive." Evelyn smiled the way people smile when they already know the answer they want. "I'm looking at the version you finalized, Clara. There's a clear gap. This looks like an oversight on your part." The room went quiet in that particular corporate way, phones still pens, still eyes carefully neutral. I felt heat climb up my neck. I could feel every person at the table deciding whether to look at me or at Evelyn. Taylor shifted in her seat and typed something on her laptop without meeting my eyes. After the meeting, Evelyn asked me to stay behind. The door clicked shut and the calm tone disappeared. "You put the team in a bad position today," she said, standing with her arms crossed. "I need you to sign this acknowledgement. It states that you own the error in the client report and that you will complete the documented coaching plan we discussed last month. If you don't sign, we move straight to a formal performance review. Your choice." She slid a single sheet across the table. My name was already typed at the top. The language was careful and corporate, the kind that sounds reasonable until you realize it becomes permanent record. I stared at the line waiting for my signature and felt something small and important inside me go very still. "I didn't make that change," I said. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. "You revised the file yourself. I have the emails." Evelyn's expression didn't shift. "Emails can be interpreted many ways, Clara. Right now, the only thing that matters is how this looks to the client and to leadership. Sign it or we have a much larger conversation with HR tomorrow morning." She left the paper on the table and walked out. I sat there alone for a long minute, the glass walls making me feel like I was inside a fishbowl. When I finally stepped into the hallway, Taylor was waiting near the elevators. She looked uncomfortable, but not surprised. I had to mention to Evelyn, that you seemed really stressed about the data last week," she said quietly. She asked if I had noticed anything off. I didn't want to lie. I looked at her. We had gone to the same happy hours, shared the same complaints about late nights and impossible deadlines. I had covered for her when she missed a deadline 2 months earlier. The betrayal landed somewhere between my ribs and my throat. "You told her I was struggling," I said. Taylor's mouth tightened. "She's the one who signs our reviews, Clara." "I have rent, too." I didn't answer. I took the stairs down to the parking garage because I couldn't stand the idea of standing still in an elevator with anyone else. The drive back to my townhome in Alpharetta felt longer than it ever had. The afternoon light on the tree-lined streets looked almost mocking everything neat and expensive, and untouched by what had just happened inside that glass building. When I got home, I dropped my bag by the door and stood in the middle of the living room for a while, not sure what to do with my hands. The townhome was quiet in the way new places are quiet, when you haven't filled them with enough life yet. I thought about calling my mother. She had moved to a smaller place closer to my father after I left for college, and we talked most Sundays. But today, I didn't want to hear the version of concern that always ended with "just keep your head down, honey." I had already heard that from Brooke and my father. Instead, I went to the small closet in the hallway where I kept the few boxes I hadn't unpacked yet. One of them was the one my mother had mailed me 6 months earlier with a short note. "For when the job gets heavier than you expected. Don't open it unless you have to. I had put it away because I didn't want to need it. I pulled it out now." Inside were 2 things: a sealed envelope with my name in her handwriting and a small USB drive, labeled in the same careful script. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and opened the envelope first. "Clara, I hope you never need this, but if Evelyn Hart ever starts rewriting the story so that her mistakes become yours, I want you to have what I kept from years ago. She did something similar at the last company we both worked for before you were even in high school. I didn't speak up then because I was scared of what it would cost me. I've regretted it ever since. The drive has the old email chain and a short video recording I made of a meeting where she did almost exactly what she did to you today. I never used it. Maybe you will be braver than I was. I love you. Mom." I read the letter twice. My hands were shaking by the second time. My mother had known Evelyn Hart. She had worked in the same industry, in the same kind of corporate world, and she had watched the same pattern years before I ever walked into that Alpharetta office. She had saved the evidence anyway, just in case the same thing happened to her daughter. I plugged the USB into my laptop. The first file was a PDF of old emails, Evelyn instructing someone to alter a report, and then blaming the junior associate when it surfaced. The second file was a video. It was low quality, clearly recorded on an old phone from the back of a conference room, but the voices were clear. Evelyn's voice younger but unmistakable, telling a room full of people that the error belonged to the girl who prepared the deck. I closed the laptop and pressed my hands over my eyes. The quiet in the townhome felt different now. Not peaceful, heavy. My mother had known. She had seen this coming in some way I couldn't have imagined, and she had left me the one thing that could prove I wasn't crazy. My phone buzzed. It was Jordan Hale from the product team, someone I had only spoken to a handful of times in passing. He had been in the meeting that morning. "Hey, you okay after that?" What Evelyn did wasn't right. If you need someone to talk to who isn't in your direct chain, I'm around. I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't know Jordan well enough to trust him yet, but I also didn't know who else I could trust inside that building anymore. I typed back a short reply. "Thanks, I might take you up on that." Then I sat on the floor with my mother's letter in one hand and the USB in the other, and I let myself cry for the first time since the meeting. Not loud, just quiet, exhausted tears that came from realizing the people I'd trusted to have my back, my boss, my coworker, Even the version of my family that always told me to endure had all decided the easiest thing was for me to carry the blame. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with the files my mother had saved. I only knew that the ground underneath my carefully built life in Alpharetta had shifted, and I was standing on something much thinner than I had realized. I stayed on the floor of my townhome in Alpharetta for almost an hour after Jordan Hale's message. The USB drive sat on my lap like something alive. My mother's letter was still in my hand, the paper soft from being read and reread. Outside, the late afternoon light filtered through the blinds in clean stripes across the hardwood, the same light that had always made this place feel safe when I first moved here. It didn't feel safe anymore. I finally stood up, made myself a cup of tea. I didn't drink, and called my mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice the same steady one that had talked me through college applications, and my first real breakup. When I told her what had happened in the meeting, she went quiet for a long moment. "I was afraid this might happen one day," she said finally. "Evelyn Hart was already doing this kind of thing when I worked in the industry 15 years ago. Different company, same pattern. She finds the youngest person on the team, the one who still believes hard work is enough, and she makes them the reason her own shortcuts didn't work. I kept those files because I never wanted you to be standing where I stood with no proof and no one willing to believe you." Her words landed with a weight I wasn't ready for. My mother had known the shape of this betrayal before I even accepted the job in Alpharetta. She had carried that knowledge quietly, hoping I would never need it. The fact that I did need it now made me feel both protected and terribly exposed at the same time. "I don't know what to do," I said. My voice cracked on the last word. She wants me to sign something that says the error was mine. If I don't, she's talking about a formal review. My mother sighed, the sound of someone who had lived long enough to know there are no clean answers. "You have to decide what you can live with, Clara. Signing it might keep your job for now, but it will also teach her that you'll carry her mistakes." Some days I still wish I'd spoken up back then. Other days I'm glad I didn't lose everything trying. We talked for another 20 minutes. She didn't push me to fight or to fold. She just listened in that careful way she has when she knows the choice is mine and the cost will be mine too. When we hung up, I felt both steadier and more alone. The next morning I went back to the office because I didn't know what else to do. I wore the same navy blazer-like armor. Evelyn was already in her office when I arrived. She called me in before I could even set my bag down. "Did you sign the acknowledgement?" she asked, not bothering with "good morning." I shook my head. "I need more time to review it." Her expression tightened in a way that was almost polite. "Time is something we don't have right now, Clara. The client is asking questions. Leadership wants this resolved before the end of the week. If you're not willing to take ownership, we need to discuss whether this role is still the right fit for you." She said it like she was offering career advice instead of a threat. I stood there in her doorway and felt the floor tilt again. This was the same woman who had praised my work in my last review. The same woman who had told me I had real potential during my first year. Now she was rewriting 6 months of feedback in real time, and she expected me to help her do it. Taylor avoided me all morning. When we passed in the hallway, she gave me a quick, tight smile and kept walking. By lunch, the rumor had already started circulating in the way office rumors do, quiet sideways, never quite direct. Someone from another team mentioned in the break room that they had heard I struggled with attention to detail on big deliverables. I didn't have to guess where that had come from. I ate lunch alone at my desk and texted my best friend, Mia Torres, the one person from college who had moved to Atlanta and still checked on me every few weeks. She called me back during her own lunch break. "Clara, that's messed up," she said after I told her the short version. "You have the emails right. Forward them to me. We can at least document everything in case this gets worse." Mia had always been the practical one. She didn't tell me to calm down or to just sign it. She treated what was happening like it was real and unfair, and that small thing almost undid me. After work, I drove straight to my appointment with Dr. Lena Morales. I had started seeing her 3 months earlier, when the Sunday scaries had turned into full weeks of tight shoulders and bad sleep. She worked out of a small office in a quiet professional building near the Alpharetta Square, the kind of place with soft lighting and tissues on every table. I had never expected to need an emergency session, but I texted her assistant anyway and she fit me in at the end of her day. Dr. Lena listened without interrupting while I described the meeting, the demand to sign Taylor's comment in the hallway, and the files my mother had left. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, the way she gets when she's choosing her words carefully. "You're carrying a lot right now," she said. "The betrayal at work, the pressure from family to endure it, and now this discovery that your mother saw this pattern years ago. It makes sense that you feel both protected and completely overwhelmed." "I don't know if I can fight this," I told her. "I'm 28. I have loans. I like living here. If I push back, I might lose the job and the stability I've spent 2 years building." Dr. Lena nodded. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the decision itself. It's accepting that every option has a real cost, and none of them feel fair. She didn't tell me what to do. She never does. But sitting in that quiet room saying the whole thing out loud to someone who wasn't invested in me, keeping my mouth shut, loosened something that had been clenched since Tuesday. When I got home, there was another text from Jordan Hale. "If you're free after work tomorrow, there's a coffee shop near the office park that's usually empty around 6. No pressure. Just thought you might want to talk to someone who was in that room and saw the same thing you did." I stared at the message for a long time before answering. I barely knew Jordan. He worked on the product side, came to meetings when his team's data was involved, and had always been polite in the way people are when they don't want to make waves. But he had been there. He had seen Evelyn redirect the blame in real time, and he was offering to meet anyway. I typed back, "Okay." 6:15. The coffee shop was one of those minimalist places with exposed brick and plants in every corner, the kind that catered to people who worked in the corporate park and needed somewhere to decompress before the commute home. Jordan was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small table in the back with 2 cups. He pushed one toward me when I sat down. "I got you the lavender one," he said. "Figured you might need something calming." I managed a small laugh that didn't quite land. "Thanks." For a few minutes we talked around it, the weather, how traffic had been worse than usual, the new building going up across the street. Then Jordan set his cup down and looked at me directly. "What Evelyn did in that meeting wasn't okay," he said. "I've seen her do versions of it before, but never that publicly. And Taylor, I don't know what she told her, but it clearly fed whatever story Evelyn wanted to tell." Hearing someone else name it out loud made my eyes sting again. I told him about the USB, about my mother's letter, about the old emails and the video. I didn't show him the files yet. I just told him they existed. Jordan was quiet while I talked. When I finished, he said, "If you decide to go to HR, having someone who was in the room and is willing to corroborate what they saw could matter. I'm not trying to push you either way. I just want you to know you're not the only one who noticed." We sat there for almost an hour. He didn't offer easy fixes or tell me I was overreacting. He just listened and offered the one thing I hadn't had since the meeting, someone inside the building who was willing to say the obvious thing out loud. When I got back to my townhome that night, I called my older sister Brooke. I needed to hear a familiar voice that wasn't my own thoughts looping. She listened to the whole story, the same way she always does, patient, a little brisk, already thinking 3 steps ahead. "Clara, I know it feels huge right now," she said when I finished, "but signing the acknowledgement might be the smarter move. You're early in your career. A formal review could follow you. Evelyn has been there a long time. Fighting her on this could make things harder for you later, even if you're right." I had expected her to say something like that. It still hurt. "Mom knew about her," I said. "She left me proof from years ago." Brooke was quiet for a second. "That doesn't change what's happening now. Mom had her own reasons for staying quiet back then. You have to think about what's best for your future, not just what's fair." We ended the call without either of us raising our voices. That somehow made it worse. My sister wasn't angry. She was just being practical in the way our family had always been practical. Protect the job, protect the reputation. Don't make it harder than it already is. I sat on my couch with my laptop open and the USB plugged in again. I read the old emails my mother had saved. I watched the low-quality video of Evelyn doing almost exactly what she had done to me, only to someone else 15 years earlier. The pattern was so clear it almost felt stupid that I hadn't seen it coming. My phone lit up with a text from my father. Brooke must have told him. Just checking in, kiddo. Your sister mentioned work has been stressful. Remember, sometimes the best thing is to keep your head down and let it blow over. We're proud of you either way. I didn't answer right away. I sat there with the phone in my hand and felt the slow, painful understanding settle in. My family wasn't going to stand with me if I chose to fight this. They loved me. They wanted me to be okay. But their version of okay was me signing the paper, absorbing the blame, and moving on without making anyone uncomfortable. I closed the laptop and opened a new document. I didn't title it yet. I just started typing the facts in order of the meeting. What Evelyn said, what the email showed, what my mother had left me, what Jordan had witnessed. I didn't know if I would ever send it. I only knew that writing it down made the shaking in my hands stop for a little while. Outside, the Alpharetta night was quiet. Inside, I was still deciding what I could live with and what I couldn't. The USB sat on the coffee table like a small, heavy promise my mother had kept for years without telling me. I didn't feel brave yet. I only felt tired and very aware that whatever I chose next was going to cost me something I couldn't get back. I stayed up late that night in my Alpharetta townhome, the document I had started still open on my laptop. The words felt raw and unfinished, but they were mine. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet in the way suburban corporate towns get quiet after dark streetlights glowing on manicured lawns, the distant hum of the highway that carried people back and forth to jobs just like mine. I kept thinking about my mother's letter, about the way she had carried proof for years without using it, and about how scared she sounded on the phone when I told her what was happening now. The next morning, I called Jordan Hale before I lost my nerve. We met again at the same coffee shop after work. I showed him the old emails and the video from the USB. He watched in silence, then looked at me with something that looked like anger on my behalf. "This isn't the first time she's done this," he said quietly. "If you're going to HR, I'll go with you." I was in the room. I saw exactly what happened. You shouldn't have to do this alone. I had never expected someone I barely knew to offer that. It made the decision feel both more possible and more terrifying. That weekend, I also had a longer session with Dr. Lena Morales. I told her about the document I was writing about Jordan's offer, about my family's reaction. She listened the way she always does, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. What would it cost you to sign the acknowledgement and stay? I thought about it for a long time. My self-respect, the ability to look at myself in the mirror without wondering if I taught my boss that she can always find someone else to blame. And maybe the next person she does this to won't have a mother who saved old files. Dr. Lena nodded. And what would it cost you to file the complaint I didn't have to think as long? Probably my job. Maybe my relationship with my family for a while. The stability I've built here. We sat with that truth for the rest of the session. There were no easy answers, only the clear understanding that both paths had real lasting prices. When I left her office, I felt shaky, but clearer than I had in days. On Monday, I asked to meet with Patricia Lang in HR. She was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and the careful posture of someone who had heard every version of every story before. Jordan came with me. I brought printed copies of the old emails, the video on a flash drive, and the new document I had written, describing exactly what happened in the meeting and the demand to sign. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked clarifying questions in a neutral voice, then told us an investigation would begin. She couldn't promise outcomes. She could only promise that the company took these matters seriously. Evelyn was informed the same day. The next morning, she called me into her office again. This time the door stayed open, and her tone was different, still controlled but with an edge of something colder underneath. "I understand you've made this a formal matter," she said. "That's your right. But I want you to understand that once these things start, they tend to follow people. Even when the facts are on your side, the perception can be difficult to shake. I hope you've thought this through carefully." I looked at her and realized I wasn't afraid in the same way anymore. The fear was still there, but it was sitting beside something steadier. I said. The investigation took 3 weeks. Jordan gave his statement. 2 other people from the meeting quietly corroborated parts of what I had described. The old files from my mother were reviewed by legal. During those weeks, Evelyn stopped speaking to me directly. Taylor avoided the entire floor when I was there. My performance metrics were suddenly scrutinized in ways they never had been before. Small things, meeting invites that didn't include me, client emails that used to come to my inbox, now routing around me. My family's response was quieter, but just as painful. My father stopped calling as often. When I did talk to him, he sounded tired. "I just don't want to see you burn bridges you might need later," he said once. My sister Brooke sent a single text. "I hope you know what you're doing." My mother called every few days, but her voice had a new caution in it. She was proud of me, she said. She was also scared for me. She didn't offer to come visit. She didn't push me to stop. She simply held space on the phone while I cried or vented or sat in silence. At the end of the 3rd week, Patricia Lang called me back into her office. The investigation had found that Evelyn had exercised poor judgment in how she handled the client report and the subsequent conversation with me. She had been issued a formal written warning and moved to a different client portfolio with increased oversight. She would not be terminated. The company valued her institutional knowledge and long tenure. I sat with that news for a long moment. It was something. It was not justice. It was a slap on the wrist that would fade from her record in a year or 2, while I was still carrying the weight of having been the one who spoke up. 2 days later, Evelyn requested a private conversation in a small conference room. Jordan offered to wait outside. I went in alone. She looked tired in a way I'd never seen before. The polished authority was still there, but something underneath it had cracked. "You didn't have to do it this way," she said. "We could have handled it internally." I met her eyes. "You asked me to sign a lie. I chose not to." She was quiet for a while. Then she said something I didn't expect. "Your mother was right about me once. I didn't think anyone would ever remember." I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say that would change what had already happened. After that conversation, the environment at work became impossible in quiet ways. I was given less meaningful work. My calendar stayed strangely empty. Colleagues who used to stop by my desk now walked past with quick nods. I started applying for other roles quietly, but the market was tight, and my confidence was lower than it had been in years. One evening in late spring, I sat at my kitchen table with a resignation letter I had written 3 different versions of. I called Dr. Lena first, then I called Jordan, then I called my mother. None of them told me what to do. They just listened while I said out loud that I couldn't keep showing up to a place that had decided my truth was inconvenient. I submitted my resignation the next morning, 2 weeks' notice. I didn't give a reason beyond personal circumstances. Patricia Lang accepted it with professional regret. Evelyn didn't say anything at all. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest I have lived through at 28. I lost the steady paycheck that had let me build the life I wanted in Alpharetta. I lost the version of my family that felt safe and uncomplicated. My sister stopped reaching out. My father's texts became shorter. My mother still called, but the conversations carried a new distance. She loved me, but she was also protecting herself from watching me lose more than I already had. What I didn't lose was the knowledge that I had refused to carry someone else's lie. Jordan stayed in touch. Mia helped me update my resume and introduced me to a few freelance opportunities. Dr. Lena kept our sessions going even when I had to stretch to afford them. Slowly, I started taking small contract projects in the same field, work I could do from my town home, with clear boundaries about what I would and would not accept. 6 months later, I was still rebuilding. I had less money and less certainty than I had before the meeting that changed everything. I also had something I hadn't possessed at 28, before the quiet certainty that I would rather lose almost anything than let someone rewrite my story while I watched. My mother sent me a new letter around that time. She wrote that she was sorry she hadn't been braver when she was younger, and that watching me choose differently had healed something in her she hadn't known was still broken. She didn't ask me to come home or to smooth things over with my sister and father. She simply said she was proud and that she would keep being proud no matter how the rest of it unfolded. I still think about that Tuesday morning in the glass conference room sometimes. I think about Evelyn's calm voice asking me to explain a discrepancy she had created. I think about Taylor's careful betrayal and my family's careful silence. I think about the USB my mother had saved for years without telling me, and about Jordan showing up when he didn't have to. The lesson I carry now is simple and expensive. Self-worth is not something you negotiate in rooms where the other person holds all the power. Sometimes the only way to protect it is to walk away, even when walking away costs you the job you built, the city you chose, and the family approval you once took for granted. I lost more than I expected when I refused to sign that paper. I also kept the one thing I could not afford to lose, my own name, on my own story. Thank you for listening to my story. Would you have signed the acknowledgement to keep the peace, or would you have taken the risk I did? I'd really like to know what you would have chosen.